We're brought here today by the love that Sarah and Davis share for each other.
We're going to be so happy.
We'll be so happy. I'm gonna crush it at being a husband. I really hope she looks like her picture. Pete says she has a good personality. That's a red flag.
Davis?
Whoa, that is one beautiful personality.
Cutie alert.
Thank you,
Pete.
Sorry, I got you a latte.
Oh.
I hope you like it.
Thanks, latte. Why did I just say that?
Quick, say something.
Oh, yeah, that's dairy. Probably shouldn't immediately correct him.
So do you... sports? Failure.
Yeah, I love golf. What? No, I don't.
I hate golf.
Me too. Yes, I love with the chipping and the putting, birdies.
Nope, tweet. Get a hold of yourself. So what are you looking for in a relationship? Oh my gosh, I'm gonna die alone.
It's
Someone just like me.
Someone who's just kind of their own person.
Someone pretty adventurous.
Someone who likes to stay at home.
Someone who'll just listen to me.
Someone who doesn't talk too much.
Someone who isn't intimidated by how much money I make.
Somebody who doesn't mind how little money I make.
He looks like a good dad.
Hope she doesn't want kids, like, soon.
it's like another person.
Oh, that's me. I mean, me too.
I think I love her.
Wow, time flew by.
It's over? Think fast.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You gotta, do you want me to maybe...
Should I give her a hug? Is that weird?
No. Okay.
No, kiss.
Okay.
No, wait. Oh my gosh, what do I do?
This is great.
What is happening?
Go.
Okay.
Ooh, he smells good.
Well, I'll just see you.
Well, you messed that up.
It's okay. We'll crush our second date.
I don't know if that is representative of your first date or not, but you don't have to raise your hand here. We're in a series called What Happy Couples Know, and that's what we've been talking about. We've been looking forward to the future and trying to say, are there some things that we can do as couples when couples come together to get married? There's some things that we can do in order to get there. Right? Because when you come to the altar, you come and you stand there and there's love between you and the person you're going to marry. And your desire as you look into the future, your desire is to make it to the end, but not just make it to hang on, right? Your desire is for your love to grow, right? You want to be more in love at the end than you were at the beginning, hopefully. You want to not just get there, but you want to get there and still be happy, right? Still be happily married. You want to be thriving and you want things to be good and not just kind of living in the same house, just kind of making things work and happen and no real connection and love, right? We want things to be good. And so if that's the goal, if that's what we're trying to do, if that's the aim, that's what we're striving towards, that's what we're hoping towards, that's what we're praying towards, then there's a few things that we can learn from other people who've done that, right? There's some people in this world who some of you know some people who've done that. They've made it to the end and things are good for them. And so there's some things they've learned and some things that we're going to talk about that we've gotten from them and people like them to help us do just that. And so last week we talked about some of that stuff. We talked about, there was a guy named Paul and he wrote a large portion of the New Testament. And what he tried to do is he said, when Jesus was here on this earth, Jesus said, hey, we're to love other people. And that's not just your spouse, but we're to love other, pretty much everyone, right? That's what Jesus taught. And so Paul, as he's writing these letters to these different churches all around, he's writing and he's basically saying, here's how to do that, right? And so one of the letters he writes is to a church in Ephesus, and as he writes, he says, hey, you should love other people the way Jesus has loved you. And so he kind of states that, and then he goes through a bunch of things about how to do that. And one of the things he writes about is marriage and how to love within your marriage and how to work out this idea that Jesus taught, how to work that out in marriage. And last week we looked at the idea of love and respect, that a husband should love his wife and the wife should respect her husband. And in that kind of sums up last week. And we looked at a particular passage that Paul wrote. We looked at several verses. But I don't know if you were aware of that, but I intentionally left some things out. I didn't talk about everything that Paul talked about within that section of his letter. And so today we're going to leave some things out. We're not going to be able to talk about everything because we would be here for far longer than you want to be. And so we're going to leave some things out again. But I do want to talk about one thing that I didn't talk about last week. And so we'll just dive right into that. And so Paul writes, "Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior." Now, depending on how you grew up, depending on what church you attended, if you attended church growing up, depending on what kind of church that was, you may be familiar with this idea that wives are to submit to their husbands, and the husbands is the head of the wife, or the husband is the leader of the marriage, and that kind of thing. And for some of us, we hear that and we automatically go to a certain place. We automatically go, some of us to a bad place. Some of us go and hear that and we're like, well, that's not me, so I'm just going to redact that, right? Right? So we're going to redact that. And others of us, we're like, that's the way it's supposed to be. And we're all about this whole idea, right? Because, for some of us, we kind of like this kind of thing. Or for some of us, we grew up in a household where this was the case, and you just know no other way. For some of us, we hear that and we're like, well, if that's what it means to follow Jesus, then I'm not so sure I want to buy into that. Because that does not sound great. Others of us, we hear that and we're like, well, that was culturally relevant, culturally true back then, but that's not us today, right? And so we're just going to put that in that was culturally back then, and we're different today. So I want to just kind of put ourselves at ease for just a moment, because culturally, if that was true, okay, culturally, that was the way things were. Wives submitted to their husbands, or else they were kicked out of the house, or sold, or worse. Husbands were definitely in charge. They were definitely the leader, and they could pretty much do whatever they want. Women, their wives were pretty much like property. And so, if that's what Paul was getting at, if we take that out of context of what else Paul was writing, then he would have never had to have written that to begin with. Because that was already true in his culture. That was the way women operated. Women knew that if they didn't submit, they would face consequences. And the husbands knew that they were in charge because they pretty much could do whatever they wanted to do. And so that was true. So there was no need for Paul to say that unless he was putting it into context. And so I want to back up a little bit and see the context that Paul writes this. Because I think it's helpful for us as we try to understand this. And so if we back up all the way to verse 18, Paul is writing Again, remember, he's writing to those people who've decided to follow Jesus, that Jesus died and rose from the dead, and that event in history was significant, that you could have your sins forgiven because of what Jesus did, that he died in your place. And so that's who he's writing to. And he tells them to be filled with the Spirit. Now, if you're new to church and you're new to God and that kind of thing, this can sound kind of weird. I will admit that. But I just want you to know that for those of us who've decided to follow Jesus, we believe that God sends his Spirit to live inside of us who've decided that. Those of us who've accepted what he did on the cross for us, we believe that his Spirit lives inside of us to help us live the life that he wants us to live. And so that's kind of where Paul starts this idea. He says, be filled with the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Jesus living inside of us. And then he kind of starts writing, well, what does that look like? For those people who are filled with the Spirit, what does their life look like? And he says, well, it looks like this: speaking to one another with psalms and hymns and songs from the Spirit. Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. And so that's what characterizes someone who is filled with the Spirit. But he's not done here. The sentence, in English, we have a period at the end. But when Paul was writing, he wrote in Greek, and there is no period. The sentence carries on. And it says this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. The sentence carries on. And so this is the rest of the sentence. And so this is also something that should characterize those who are filled with the Spirit. You're to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And it's as if, as Paul's writing, he's writing these things that should characterize someone who's filled with the Spirit, and he gets to this idea, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then he thinks, wow, that this is such a big idea, I feel like I need to explain it. I feel like I need to apply it to some different areas because, again, this is a general statement. This is a general principle. This isn't specifically into marriage yet. We're going to get there in a second. Okay? So this is just a general principle for anyone and everyone who has decided to follow Jesus. Now, if you've not decided that yet, we're so glad you're here. And you can decide if you want to do this or not. But for those of us who've decided to follow Jesus, this is something we're to do. And then Paul starts explaining, well, okay, this principle, this overarching principle, can actually be worked out in marriage. And he spends a few sentences working that out. And then after that, he talks about the parent-child relationship and how you should work out this idea of submitting to one another in a parent-child relationship. And then he talks about a slave-master relationship and how this overarching principle plays itself out in slave-master relationship. And because those were the three big types of relationships in that day and time. And so Paul wants us to know that this is a big idea. This is a big deal. And it can be played out. This principle can be played out in all of life. And so as he talks about submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ, as he talks about that in relation to marriage, then he spends several verses talking about that. And that's where we get wives submit to husbands. That's where we get husband is the head of the church, or head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. And then he goes on, and then he basically summarizes that whole idea about how to work it out in marriage. And this is what we looked at last week. He says, however, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. And so that was kind of his summary statement at the end of the marriage part, right? And we looked at that last week. And so I want to back up a little bit and focus in on that verse 21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Because I think this can be helpful for us as we look to the future and look to create that marriage that we want, to create that happy marriage. And so this idea of submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ, first of all, it's not out of reverence for each other. That's the first thing we need to know. It's not out of reverence for each other. It's not because they deserve it, right? Because there are times when our spouse is not acting in that way, right? There are times when our spouse is not acting in a way that deserves that reverence. But if we look at it out of reverence for Christ and let that influence our behavior, well, that's a game changer. That's new and that's different. If we look at Jesus, I'm so grateful for what you've done for me, that's going to change my behavior. I'm so grateful, Jesus, that you died in my place. I'm so grateful, Jesus, that I can now have my sins forgiven. Jesus, I'm so grateful for all the blessings that you've given me. And on and on and on. Jesus, I am so grateful. I'm in awe of you. I'm respecting you. I'm reverencing you because of what you've done. And because of that, that changes my behavior. Because of that, now I'm able to look at him and now submit to one another. Again, a general principle, but within marriage, then it's this idea of mutual submission. That the husband submits to the wife, and the wife submits to the husband, and the husband submits to the wife, and the wife submits to the husband, and it's almost like a submission competition. And this idea of it's not just one person submitting. It's not just the wife that's submitting. It's both. It's submitting to one another. This idea of submitting to one another, it's I'm loaning who I am for your benefit. I'm loaning you my power, my assets, my resources, my time. I'm loaning that to you for your benefit. That's what it means to mutually submit. And again, it's not necessarily because they deserve it or because they're acting in a way that deserves it. It's out of reverence for Jesus and what he did for us. But Jesus, in a sense, when he went to the cross, he leveraged himself for our benefit. He leveraged himself for your benefit. He died in your place. He died in my place. And so he took who he was, the perfect Son of God. He took himself and leveraged himself for our benefit. But it wasn't just on the cross that he did that. If you remember, hours before he goes and leverages himself in that way, hours before that, he's having a kind of a last meal with his guys. His 12 guys, he had his closest followers. And he's kind of having a last meal with them. And in this last meal, he decides he needs to kind of take it to the next level. And he needs to leave them an example for them to follow. And so at that meal, he decides he takes off his outer garment and takes a towel over his arm, which means he's now taking on the posture of a slave. And he goes one by one by one around the room and washes their feet. This was something that they had never experienced before, because other Jewish slaves did not do this. They only let foreign slaves wash their feet. Because for another Jewish person, it was just something you didn't make them do, even if they were a slave. So they had never had their feet washed before by another Jewish man. And there he goes around the room, washing their feet, giving them an example of love and of mutual submission. He was leveraging himself for their sake and for their benefit. And in the midst of that, no one in the room questioned who the leader was. Everybody knew who the leader was. It was the one who was submitting himself to them. And so with this idea of trying to figure out, okay, wives, submit to your husbands, but husbands are to be the head of the wife. When you take a step back and look at it through the eyes of Jesus, through the reverence of Jesus, when it's this idea of mutual submission, it's not, well, the man is the head, and so everything runs through him. And he makes all the decisions. And what he says goes. And if there's one TV in the house, he decides what channel it's on. And on and on and on it goes. It doesn't work that way. That's not what Paul had in mind. He has in mind wives submitting to husbands and husbands being the head. He has that in mind underneath the umbrella, underneath the overarching principle of mutual submission. So Andy Stanley, he says that in talking about mutual submission, he says it begs us to ask this question: what can I do to help? If you think about this idea of mutual submission, and I'm trying to leverage all that I am for all that you are, well, then it begs the question, if I'm going to leverage who I am and my time and my resources and my power and my assets for your benefit, then what can I do to help you? What can I do to help you? Is that part of your regular routine in terms of your communication with your spouse? What can I do to help? I see you have this thing, and you've got this responsibility, and you've got this burden, and this is what you're going through, and I'm not trying to interfere. Let's get that on the table first, right? I'm not trying to interfere. But I'm realizing, I'm recognizing you've got this thing. And is there anything I can do to help? Hey, I know this is going on, and you've got this coming up, and all of these things. Okay, I know you're amazing, and you can cover everything, but I'm not trying to overstep. Is there anything I can do to help? I became aware of this idea about 10 years ago. And one of the ways I started trying to apply this in our lives at home, and it doesn't happen every day, but it happens on the good days. And on the good days, it usually happens right before supper time. And right before supper time, Stacy's in the kitchen and she's getting supper ready, and on the good days, I'm able to come in and say, hey, is there anything I can do to help? And that question, the answer to that question varies, and the answer to that question changes depending on a lot of different circumstances. And sometimes the answer to that question is, yeah, you can help. Can you cut some vegetables? Other times, yeah, you can help. The kids need you to go play with them. And I need you to go play with them so they can get out the house so I can do this in peace. And then other times is, yeah, you can help. I don't need help here. There's a pile of laundry. And it changes from day to day. And like I said, that doesn't happen every day. That happens on the good days. And the answer to that changes. And it's not like I think she can't handle it. And it's not like I think she can't do it. And she's amazing. And she does a lot of stuff. But it's me understanding, hey, I don't want you to feel like you're doing this on your own. I don't want you to feel like you're isolated or left alone, like I'm just doing my own thing and I'm just here for me. I want you to know that we're in this together. And as you understand that and realize that we're on the same team and we're here trying to accomplish the same things. So I've got some time and I've got some resources and I want to loan you me for a few minutes to help you, to help us, for your benefit, for our benefit, for the sake, not for the sake of me, but for the sake of us. That's just one way it works in our house. I could give you some other examples, but I can't tell you enough how much asking this question helps. And there's a lot more I can say about this, but I cannot overstate what a difference this idea can make in your marriage. Because one thing happy couples know is that it's all about mutual submission. So I'd encourage you today to make this idea part of your vocabulary, part of your routine, part of your marriage, to ask the question, what can I do to help? Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for Jesus who died in our place. God, we give you praise and honor and glory and thankfulness for that. God, I pray for each and every person here who is married or working towards that this idea would get ingrained in them, that you would give them the wisdom to know how it fits into their life, to their marriage, and then, God, the courage to follow up with it and to ask the question, what can I do to help? Commit this to you in Jesus' name. Amen.